Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys for a little while about how to use training volume as an actual progressive overload tool rather than something that people just do all the time mindlessly without thinking about it. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. Let's work on a little bit of crafting and see if I can skill it up here, and let's talk about this. All right, one of the things that people always do with the high volume training is that they get this impression that the volume itself is some key to growth without understanding that progressive overload is the key to growth. We've known this for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks figured this out and wrote about it. So everything is about progressive overload, and volume is one form of overload. And as long as you're progressing at something, you're going to get bigger, you're going to get stronger. When you stop progressing at something, you very quickly are going to stop getting bigger and stop getting stronger. And so what I would explain to people is that when you use volume, you need to understand that increasing volume is itself a form of progression, meaning if you can add 2 sets to an exercise for the same workload, the same number of, same amount of weight, same number of reps, but add sets, that is a form of progressive overload, right? You've progressed, you've added workload. That workload is going to make you bigger, it's going to make you stronger if you recover from it and get sufficient nutrition and rest. Pretty straightforward, but the thing is, if you're not getting stronger or able to add actual workload inside the volume that you've added once you start doing this high volume training, then you're going to stop growing no matter how much volume you're doing. Unless you're adding something somewhere, your body is going to adapt within 3 weeks to what you're doing. It's going to stop growing. And just changing exercises randomly is not going to prevent that stagnation from happening. You're still going to stop growing. So what I would suggest to you is that there's a couple different ways that you can use volume itself as a form of progression so that you can stimulate new growth, force your body to adapt. Because that's the thing. You have to force your body to adapt because the human body doesn't want to gain muscle. It's resistant to gaining muscle. Our genetics prove that. Our myostatin being present proves that. We genetically, as a species, don't gain muscle very well. We have to work at it really hard. That's just the nature of it, and it takes time. So one method that you have, as I've explained a lot in the past, you could always just add in higher volume phases as part of blocks of periodization. But for people, a lot of people, that's not necessarily what they want to do. They really like training volume itself. Somewhat fairly advanced lifters sometimes, especially people who've been training a few years, they feel like they stalled and have plateaued easily. A lot of them really do like the higher volume training. And I get that. And if it's something you really want to use as a form of progression, what I would suggest to you is to learn how to use dual factor recovery models so that you can do it. And the way that you would do that means you need to use the actual training volume as a form to overreach, to reach beyond what your body can recover from so that you can force adaptation. And when you do that and then you back off from that overreaching and you recover from it, then you hit a growth spurt. You gain a little bit of muscle. You gain a little bit of strength. And it's a good way to break plateaus. In fact, I would say adding volume in a manner like this is one of the ways, a very effective way to break through a plateau when you found that for a while you can't add weight to the bar, you can't seem to add reps with the same weight, you stagnated and plateaued. This is a sort of method you could use to push through a plateau. And it's not through shocking anything, it's by pushing beyond your max recoverable volume or exceeding your body's capacity for fatigue, what it can recover from. And the way that you could do that, for example, let's say you normally like to do X amount of total sets per week for a given exercise or body part. And it could be it's something as simple as you've been doing 10 sets per week because you're a fairly high volume trainer. That's moderate to semi-high volume. Not really high volume, but that's moderate volume on a given body part. And it could be your bench press plus dips or whatever else. You do your 10 sets. What you could do is you could start with your 10 sets during an entire week of training, whether you're training that body part 2 or 3 times a week, doesn't matter. If you're training it less than that, you got bigger fish to fry, though, than your periodization. Drug-free lifters training a body part or exercise once a week, bad idea. I've done countless videos on why that is. All the research is overwhelmingly conclusive on that. For both novice and advanced lifters, it's a slow way to progress. Then we're talking about people here who are wanting some maximum progress. So you're going to be hitting it 2 or 3 times a week, largely irrelevant for this conversation. You're doing your 10 sets. What you could do the next week, you could add 3 sets. Maybe you're doing 3 different exercises. Go ahead and add a set to each one. and you would bump it up to 13 sets. Now that's a significant increase in volume. And particularly if you're able to maintain the same sort of weight you have been using, that's not bad at all to do it with the same weight. Then what you could do the next week, because you're going to adapt 2 or 3 workouts, you're going to adapt, you should be getting stronger, your work capacity should be improving. Add another 3. You could take it up to 16. At which point, again, that's getting pretty brutal at that point because you've done this now 3 weeks here, 2 weeks of increasing. You can take it up to about 16. All right, that should start to fatigue you. You're probably going to start struggling a little bit with that. You might notice on that last set or 2, you're going to have to start decreasing the weight, but that's okay. You're adding volume. You do that for a week, you'll probably get towards the end of the week, you will be getting better at it. Then one final week for up to maybe a 4th week, you could try to add 2, 3, or 4 more sets. Now, that's going to be based upon what you're going to be able to do. If you start noticing a dramatic decline in strength on something like that, you're going to have to limit it to the 2. The 3 or 4, you might do anywhere between, again, 18 to 20 sets on those basic exercises you're doing total per training session there. And again, something totally doable for people who really like high volume training. At that point, because you're normally used to doing a certain number of reps and sets, you will have completely overreached on that week. In fact, you probably started overreaching on that 3rd week. That week when you went up to 16 sets, you're probably overreaching. If you're using weights that you're generally doing 10 total sets with, and you've increased the volume like that, you're going to start overreaching in that 3rd week. That 4th week is going to push you into complete overreaching. In fact, you are going to struggle to recover from that session to session. You're probably going to feel like crap that week. Then the following week, the 5th week, you could very easily scale that way down, go all the way down to 5 sets. You started at 10, you would count that as a deload. That's a volume deload. You could cut all the way down to 5 sets, maybe even reduce your weight slightly. Why? Because you've overreached at that point using volume as a system of overreaching. And I kind of got this idea for this. This is something I already knew, but I kind of got the idea looking at Dr. Mike Israetel's post today. He gave me the idea to just explain how to use something like this, so I don't want to take full credit for me picking this topic today. That totally came from him. And I want to give credit where credit is due. But then you've overreached completely at that point. That deload is going to let you adapt, get bigger, and get stronger because you increase work capacity so much through that time. And if you give yourself that 5th week to deload and cut back, you get sufficient sleep, you get sufficient nutrition, everything else, you should hopefully recover from that overreaching because you had 2 weeks of overreaching and 1 week of pretty extreme overreaching. Had you continued to do that, you would probably reach full-blown overtraining. But the whole point with the deload is to prevent the overtraining. Now what will happen, because you have pushed yourself beyond your maximum recoverable volume and workload, you will need that next week. And what you will do during the deload week, even though you've cut everything way back to less than you normally do, because again, doing 5 sets instead of 10, you will recover hopefully. And once you recover, you will be adapting and growing from those previous weeks of overreaching. And yes, you'll grow because you are still stimulating muscle protein synthesis with the lower volume workouts that you're now doing in that 5th deload week. So what comes back around when week 6 gets there again, you should actually be stronger. You might only be 0.5% stronger. You might only be able to add 2 pounds to some of those exercises, but on that 6th week, you should be stronger than where you started at week 1. And if you're stronger, you should be able to add 0.5% or 1%. And if you're not a really advanced lifter, you probably add more at that point to your exercises, the weight on the bar, and then you could repeat the process again. And that way, every 6th week, you're increasing the weight, but the other weeks you are increasing the volume until you overreach, you reach beyond your body's recovery potential, but that stimulates a lot of adaptation because you're pushing your body beyond its limits, and then you back down with the underreaching. And you still stimulate just enough muscle protein synthesis to let your body grow from the previous week's training. And that's the beauty of a model like that. It works very, very well. Now, it takes planning. It does take dedication, and it can be difficult because you are going to have a week in there where you're going to feel tired, you're going to feel irritable, and it might interfere with your life. But if someone wanted to use really high volume as a training tool, an approach like this could be used. Now, if someone didn't want to push it that hard into overreaching, they could always use a milder version of something like this. They could even push it out further, or they could divide it into different 3-week blocks and different forms of periodization. So you have a lot of options there, but the whole thing is you can actually use volume itself not as something that's consistent where you say, well, I like high volume training, so I'm going to do 15 sets every week or 15 sets every workout of this exercise or for this body part or whatever it is, the way you break it down. But that's keeping your volume constant. You're no longer getting an additional training stimulus. It's not being used to progress. You're using it as just something that's now static. Volume is actually a useful tool that you can progress with as another tool, an alternative tool to just adding weight on the bar, adding reps, because oftentimes you can't do those forever. And when you stall on them, as I said at the start of the video, a method like this is a way that a person could potentially break through a plateau. They might only need to do it one time and then go back to a more traditional style of training. But the thing is, people need to realize volume is just one form of overload. It is not the key to muscle growth. It's just one of many factors, and it's something that you can manipulate in a dynamic manner to help yourself grow. And I know that sounds really complicated, but if you look at what I just broke down in the video, it isn't. You just add volume to add workload. You're just adding sets over time, and then you back off when it gets too hard. It's pretty straightforward. It really is that simple. It's not rocket science, even though we make it sound like that sometimes with terms like dual factor recovery models, but it really isn't. It's that simple. So it's just an alternative method that people have out there. It's not one I personally like to use, but that shouldn't matter. At the end of the day, if you want to try something and you enjoy a style of training, a method like that will work. It absolutely will work. Whether I choose to use it or not is completely irrelevant. It's about what you choose to use. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.